The ranch had no name. Not on any map, not carved into the warped wooden gate, not even whispered by the wind that dragged dust across its empty yard. It simply existed, weather-beaten fences, leaning like tired men, a barn with a sagging roof, and a house that stood stubbornly against time, sun-bleached and silent. Melissa Hart arrived first. She reined in her horse at the edge of the property and studied the place with cautious eyes. It wasn't what she'd imagined when the lawyer's letter arrived, informing her she'd inherited land from a man she barely remembered, Lias Boone, her mother's estranged uncle. She had pictured something smaller, cleaner, less lonely. Melissa slid down from the saddle, boots crunching against gravel and dry weeds. She adjusted her hat, dark hair pulled back tightly, and let out a slow breath. This ranch was supposed to be a fresh start. After losing her seamstress shop in town and burying a failed engagement along with it, she needed something solid to hold on to. She hadn't expected company. The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears just as she stepped onto the porch. She turned, hand instinctively tightening around the strap of her satchel, and watched a man ride through the open gate like he belonged there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dust-covered in a way that suggested long days outdoors. His hat shadowed his face, but his posture was easy, familiar, like someone returning home rather than trespassing. He dismounted without hesitation. "You must be lost," Melissa said, keeping her voice steady. The man looked up, surprise flickering across his features, before settling into something guarded. His eyes were a sharp, thoughtful blue. "Funny," he replied. "I was about to say the same to you." Henry Calloway had arrived with his own letter, folded neatly in his coat pocket. It claimed this ranch was his inheritance, left to him by Lias Boone, the man who'd once taken him in after his father died. Boone had taught him how to mend fences, break horses, and survive hard winters. Henry had left years ago to build a life elsewhere, but the land had never left him. Now, it seemed the land hadn't made up its mind either. Melissa and Henry stood facing each other in the dust, the space between them thick with confusion and disbelief. Words turned sharp quickly: legal claims, names of lawyers, old family ties dragged out like brittle bones. "Boone was my blood," Melissa insisted. "He raised me," Henry shot back. "This ranch was promised to me." Neither was willing to step aside. They eventually retreated into the house, spreading their letters across a scarred wooden table. The documents were maddeningly similar: same date, same signature, same promise of ownership. A mistake, perhaps, or something more deliberate. The sun dipped lower as silence settled between them. The house creaked softly, as if listening. "So," Melissa said at last, folding her arms. "What now?" Henry leaned back in his chair, studying her with reluctant interest. She wasn't what he expected: strong-willed, sharp-edged, carrying herself like someone who refused to be pushed aside. "We prove who owns it," he said. "Until then, looks like we're stuck." Melissa glanced around the empty house, the wide land beyond the windows. Sharing this place with a stranger, especially one as stubborn as he was, had not been part of her plan. Yet something stirred in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the sense that this ranch, nameless and waiting, had brought them together for a reason neither of them understood. And somewhere in the silence of the abandoned land, the past waited to be unearthed. Morning came hard and bright, sunlight spilling through cracked windows and waking the house from its long sleep. Melissa rose early, more from nerves than habit, and stood at the kitchen window watching the land stretch out in pale gold waves. The ranch looked different in daylight, less haunted, more honest. Still worn, still quiet, but alive in its own stubborn way. She heard boots behind her. Henry stopped short when he saw her already awake, as if he'd half expected the place to be empty again. He cleared his throat. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Melissa replied, though her shoulders were stiff. "I'm just getting my bearings." They shared an awkward pause, the kind born of strangers forced into proximity. The events of the previous day hovered between them, unresolved and uncomfortable. Henry moved past her to the old stove. There's a well out back. Still works. Water's cold, but clean. Thank you, she said, surprised by the small courtesy. They ate a simple breakfast in near silence hardtack. Dried fruit, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Every scrape of a chair and clink of a cup echoed too loudly in the empty house. Afterward, Henry reached for his hat. I'm going to check the fences and the south pasture. If this place is going to stand up in court, it needs to look lived in. Melissa lifted an eyebrow. You're already planning to stay. So are you, he replied evenly. She didn't argue, because he was right. They spent the morning on opposite sides of the ranch, deliberately avoiding one another. Melissa explored the house and barn, cataloging what could be repaired and what was beyond saving. She found old ledgers tucked into a drawer, brittle with age, filled with Boone's cramped handwriting, dates, expenses, notes about cattle, long gone. Henry worked outside, mending a fence that leaned like it had given up years ago. As his hands moved on instinct, memories surfaced. Boone standing beside him, correcting his knots, telling him land didn't belong to a man unless he worked for it. By midday, the sun burned hot, and Melissa ventured out with a bundle of tools she'd found. She hesitated before approaching the fence line where Henry worked. You missed a post, she said, nodding toward the far end. Henry wiped sweat from his brow and followed her gaze. You're right. Another silence fell, less sharp this time. They worked side by side for the next hour, exchanging only what was necessary. Yet Melissa couldn't help noticing how practiced Henry was, how naturally he moved through the space. And Henry, despite himself, noticed how quickly Melissa learned, how she didn't shy away from blisters or dust, how determination settled into her features when something didn't come easy. Later, they found themselves in the barn, drawn to the same discovery. An old trunk hidden beneath loose hay. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Henry picked one up carefully. These are Boone's. Melissa scanned the dates. Some are addressed to my mother. Others bore Henry's name. They read in stunned silence. The letters spoke of regret, of divided loyalties, of a man who'd loved two branches of family and hadn't known how to choose between them. Boone wrote of the ranch as a test, something meant to bring truth to light, not tear it apart. He knew this would happen, Melissa whispered. Henry nodded, slowly, and still did it. The discovery didn't settle their dispute. If anything, it complicated it further. But something shifted between them, a shared understanding that this inheritance wasn't just about land. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the stars burned bright above the nameless ranch, Melissa and Henry sat on opposite sides of the porch. Not enemies, not allies, but no longer strangers, either. The ground beneath them remained uneasy, but it was no longer empty. The first argument came over a horse. Melissa had risen before dawn to the sound of restless nickering and found Henry in the corral, tightening a cinch on one of the ranch's remaining horses, a chestnut mare, with a white blaze and more spirit than patience. You didn't ask, Melissa said, arms crossed as the sky slowly lightened. Henry glanced over his shoulder. Didn't think I had to. She needs exercise. She needs time, Melissa shot back. She's skittish. You push her too hard, she bolted. Henry straightened, irritation flashing in his eyes. I've been breaking horses since I was 16, and I've been handling them since I was 10, Melissa replied. Different doesn't mean wrong. The mare stomped, as if siding with neither of them. They stared each other down, the dust between them thick with pride and frustration. Finally, Henry exhaled and loosened the cinch slightly. Fine, he said. We do it your way. Melissa blinked, caught off guard by the concession. Thank you. It was a small victory, but it set a precedent neither of them would acknowledge aloud. As days passed, they settled into a rhythm that was equal parts cooperation and quiet conflict. Henry handled the heavy labor fences wells, repairing the barn roof, while Melissa organized the house, studied Boone's ledgers, and drafted careful letters to the county office requesting records on the ranch's ownership. Every evening, they compared notes. The more they uncovered, the stranger the truth became. Boone had never registered a formal transfer of deed. Instead, he'd paid taxes under a trust, leaving ownership deliberately ambiguous. It was as if he wanted the ranch to choose its owner, or force us to, Melissa said one night, tapping a ledger with her finger. Henry leaned back in his chair. Man was stubborn to the end. So are you, he smirked. Takes one to know one. The tension between them softened, slowly, in unspoken moments. Henry bringing Melissa water when the heat wore her down. Melissa stitching a torn saddle strap without being asked. Their conversations stretched longer after supper, drifting from practical matters to half-shared histories. Henry spoke of drifting from town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots. Melissa admitted she'd always planned her life carefully, watched it unravel anyway. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast, dark clouds swallowing the horizon. They were caught in the open pasture when the rain hit, sudden and cold. They ran for the barn, laughter breaking free as mud clung to their boots. Inside, breathless and soaked, they stood too close, the sound of rain drumming loudly above them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Melissa laughed softly. "We look ridiculous." Henry smiled an unguarded, easy thing that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Worth it. The moment passed, but something lingered, hanging in the space between them like charged air. Not all days were so gentle. A man from town arrived, with a warning someone else had heard about the ranch. Without a clear deed, the land could be claimed, auctioned, lost. The clock was ticking. That night, Melissa paced the porch. If we don't resolve this soon, we could lose everything. Henry joined her, gaze fixed on the dark land. Then we don't fight each other. We fight for it. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The lines in the dirt where she ended and he began were still there. But they were blurring, and neither of them was sure whether that frightened them, or felt like coming home. The ranch began to change them. Not all at once, and not gently, but in the way land always does through long days, tired bodies, and moments of quiet that demanded honesty. Melissa woke each morning with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Henry, for the first time since leaving Boone behind, stayed in one place long enough to imagine a future that didn't involve moving on. They worked together now, without pretense. Melissa discovered a natural talent for managing the ranch's accounts, piecing together Boone's scattered records into something the county might actually accept. Henry trained the horses, coaxing life back into neglected routines, speaking to them with the same patience Boone once showed him. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the creek, Melissa uncovered a weathered wooden marker half buried in the mud. No name, just a date carved deep into the grain. Henry crouched beside her, recognition tightening his jaw. That's where Boone buried his first horse. He said land remembers loyalty. Melissa brushed dirt from her hands. He sounds like a complicated man. He was, Henry said quietly, but he cared. About you, too. The realization settled, heavy in her chest. Boone hadn't divided the ranch out of carelessness. He'd done it out of hope. Hope they would understand what the land meant, what it demanded. Their bond deepened in shared silence more than words. Evenings were spent on the porch, shoulders nearly touching, the sky stretching wide above them. Sometimes Henry talked about Boone. Sometimes Melissa spoke of her mother. Sometimes neither spoke at all. The tension that once sparked arguments now glowed, warmer and spoken, patient, until the past came calling. A county representative arrived with paperwork and a grim expression. Without a clear owner, the ranch would be seized within weeks, unless proof could be found that Boone intended joint stewardship or evidence that one of them had worked the land long enough to claim it. Joint stewardship, Melissa repeated after the man left. That's unusual. Henry nodded. So was Boone. They spent days searching every corner of the ranch. In the attic, beneath loose floorboards, even inside the barn walls. Exhaustion set in. Frustration fraying tempers once more. One night, Melissa snapped. What if there is no answer? What if we're wasting time pretending this works? Henry stepped closer, voice low but steady. Then we decide what it means. Together. The word hung between them. She looked up at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. I didn't come here to fall apart again. He reached out, stopping just short of touching her. Neither did I. The space between them closed not in haste, but with certainty. Their first kiss was slow, careful, shaped by trust earned rather than taken. When they pulled apart, the world felt different, calmer, truer. The answer came the next morning. Hidden inside an old branding iron was a folded paper, sealed and intact. Boone's final declaration: the ranch, he wrote, was never meant to belong to one person. It was meant to be built by two, by those willing to stay, to work, to love the land and each other. Melissa's hands trembled as she read. Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The ranch still had no name, but it finally had a future. The county accepted Boone's declaration with reluctance, then surprise, then quiet approval. Joint stewardship was rare, but the evidence was undeniably as of work, recorded in Boone's careful hand. His intention unmistakably clear. The ranch would remain whole. It would remain theirs. Melissa stood beside Henry on the porch as the county representative rode away. Papers signed and sealed at last. The dust settled slowly, the land stretching out before them as if exhaling after a long wait. It's real, Melissa said softly. We didn't lose it. Henry smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. Looks like we won. She shook her head, a small laugh escaping her. No. We chose. The weeks that followed felt different, lighter. Work was still hard, but it carried meaning now. They repaired the barn properly, replaced broken rails, brought in cattle from a neighboring ranch. Melissa turned one of the spare rooms into a small office, managing accounts and correspondence. Henry trained horses and hired 2 hands from town, men who respected the land and the quiet strength of the woman who combed it. At night, they shared meals that stretched into conversations, and conversations that drifted into dreams. There was no rush, no pressure, just the steady understanding that they were building something together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and fire, Melissa stood at the gate, studying the ranch. It still doesn't have a name, she said. Henry leaned against the fence beside her. You want one? She nodded. It deserves it. They tossed ideas back and forth, some too sentimental, others too sharp. None felt right. Finally, Henry grew quiet. Boone used to say, he began, that land doesn't belong to people. People belong to the land. That if you listen long enough, it'll tell you what it wants to be called. Melissa smiled. And what does it say? Henry looked around the fields, slowly greening again. The horses grazing peacefully. The house no longer silent. Then he looked at her. It says, it waited. She swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. Then maybe that's it. They carved the name together the next morning. Waiting Heart Ranch. Simple, honest, earned. Life didn't turn perfect. Storms still came. Fences still broke. Arguments still flared now and then. But they faced it all side by side. Hands steady, hearts open. Months later, when winter edged close and the nights grew cold, Henry stood with Melissa in the barn doorway, watching the ranch settle into evening. I never thought I'd stay anywhere this long, he admitted. Melissa leaned into him. Neither did I. He took her hand, rough fingers warm around hers. Guess the ranch claimed us both. She smiled up at him. I'm glad it did. The land no longer felt abandoned. It felt alive, named, loved, and protected by 2 people who had arrived as strangers and chosen to remain as something far more. And somewhere, in the quiet stretch of open sky and steady ground, Elias Boone's hope finally rested easy. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.